My name is Bryan Hogan, and I'm going to talk about how I learn from people. I'm a developer, blogger, and podcaster. I've been making podcasts for about 5 years. I usually release one every 2 weeks. I missed last Monday because of coming here and a lot of preparation. I get to speak to the best people in the industry from around the world, and I get to ask them about things that I am interested in. It's a simple interview format done over Skype or in person, depending on where the person is located. The topics are always tech-related or to the tech industry, but not specifically programming. So you'll see I have had microservices.NET C#, but I have also had things like repetitive strain injury, career advancement, salary negotiation, accessibility, game development. I've had people from very large companies like IBM, Microsoft, and Google, and very small startups, independent consultants. And because I'm based in Boston in the US, I have local companies like DraftKings, Runkeeper, and Yesware. After an interview, I try to keep the relationship with that person because they may introduce me to other people that might want to make a podcast, or I'll be able to introduce them to someone that I know. Or I'll come to a conference like this and I'll finally meet some of the people that I have these relationships. So why do I do all this? Because I love learning from people, and people love sharing what they know. This is why I spend 5 to 6 hours on every single podcast. Between the recording, the arranging, the recording, the editing, and the posting, it is that much work. And that's every 2 weeks, along with blogging and along with a Pluralsight course and occasional conferences. The nicest compliment that I get from people about my podcast is that I ask a question and then I shut up and let them answer. I don't interrupt. I don't give my own opinion very loudly. So the rest of this talk will be a little bit about how I learn. To start off, I do my homework. I watch their videos, I read their blogs, I read their books, because I want to be able to ask good questions. And knowing more about a topic makes it easier for me to ask those good questions. And if the questions are better, it's going to be easier for the person to answer, but also for the listener. So I'm always thinking about the audience. How much would they know about a topic versus me? It has to be suitable for them. Having a common understanding right from the start is very important. If I don't know much about a topic, I am not shy to let the person know. Or if I know a lot about a topic, I'm still going to ask the basic questions to make sure we agree on fundamentals. It's always easier to lay out assumptions at the start. Like, I think something works this way. I think a bounded context is. Because if you don't have that common understanding, you'll end up talking about the same thing but in different ways, and it'll be confusing for everybody. About 60 to 70% of the time, the recording will be the first time I have sat down with the person or been on a Skype call. We've had emails, arranging the agenda, setting a time beforehand, but that will be our first face-to-face. In that little warm-up, maybe the first 10 to 20 minutes, I talk to them about the recording process, how to handle problems, what to do if they want to take a break. So by the end of that 20 minutes or so, they're relaxed. They're happy with their microphone. I've checked for background noise. I've also checked for bad habits, like tapping a table, playing with a fidget spinner, scratching stubble. All of those things are very bad for the recording. And rather than interrupting them during a recording to correct that, I've gotten it out of the way at the start. I've had a few very nervous people on the podcast, but I was relaxed, they became relaxed, and relaxed people are far more talkative. All right, so common ground established, everyone's relaxed. I get started with the interview. Looking at a person when you're talking to them is very important. I watch for their body language, gestures. I look for cues when they definitely should not be interrupted, or maybe when they should be interrupted and helped out a little bit. Some people tend to go on a little bit too long because they've run out of things to say, but they'll keep at it anyway. But I also try not to distract the person when I'm talking to them. I'll sit still. I won't play with my hair. I'm not going to adjust my mic. I'm not going to be reading a web page on the side, and I'm certainly not going to be checking my phone. If a person has been kind enough to give me their time, I'm going to let them see that I'm listening. Not only listening, but see that I'm listening. and I'm also going to be respectful. I always start with easy questions, things that they definitely know. This makes them comfortable and more talkative. But it's also interesting as well. Tell me a little bit about yourself, what you're doing, where you're from, what you're working on. What I have found to be the key for me for good interviews, podcasts, and learning from people is getting them to tell me a story. People love stories. They love listening to them, reading them, telling them. I get the interviewee to tell me a story. And the big thing about stories is that they usually have a start, a middle, and an end. With the interview, I don't jump around. That would knock a person off their stride, and it'll confuse listeners. And it also makes a story hard to understand. So the start, middle, end, very important. Last year, I made a podcast about commercial quantum computing in the finance industry, something I didn't know anything about. This was more or less the agenda. So I started with the basics, got into the details, and then had a wrap-up, a little conclusion to the whole thing. So it made it easy for me to ask the questions and for listeners to follow along and for the interviewee to tell me their story. Something I learned long before I started making podcasts was to be hard on my own opinions and to accept that what the person I'm talking to tells me is true to them. You may disagree, that's fine, but I don't argue. Giving a counter opinion, suggesting a small challenge, that's fine, but then I move on. I'm not there to push my opinion on the other people, I'm there to learn theirs. If I know we disagree, I move on. So when learning from a person, the conversation should be kind of like two people sitting on the grass, sunny day, no clouds in the sky, talking happily. And it should not be like this. The next slide will have a little video. Two people having a conversation. So I want you to pay attention to a few things. The two people are very good. They know when it's their turn to speak. They listen to each other. Very good use of body language and gestures. And they also know how to laugh at the other person's joke. All right, so we could learn a lot from those two little fellas. Good questions are key to what I do, so that's probably the most important thing for me. I keep my questions brief and clear and to the point. I have an agenda and then I follow it as much as possible. I diverge a little bit here and there, but I always come back to the agenda. And the questions usually build on the previous ones. So then the person I'm talking to, they'll know what I'm asking, but they'll also know why I'm asking. And having that context and continuity makes it easier for them to understand what I'm trying to get at. And again, not jumping around is good for them and for the audience. Though I keep my questions brief, I try to avoid yes-no questions because you may very well get a yes-no answer. So what I do instead is I try to guide with the questions. What is something? Why would I use it? How do I use it? What else could I try? Then you're building a story. This is a representation from the audio program I edit my podcasts with. The upper audio is me and the lower audio is the interviewee. I ask questions, I make a few comments, and I let the interviewee do almost all the talking. And like I said at the start, the nicest compliment I get is that I ask my questions and I stay quiet. If a person doesn't want to answer a question, or if they feel like they've given you the answer that they're going to give, move on. There's no point trying to ask the same question again. Silence is very powerful, but it is a little bit tricky to use. That was 12 seconds. And I'm sure one or two people felt uncomfortable, one or two people might have started meditating. But if a person needs a chance to think when you've asked them a question, give it to them. stay quiet if they're comfortable with it. Now, it can be difficult for some people, it can be harmful. It'll make them clam up. They'll feel like they need to say something, though it might not be the right thing. In that case, I try to maybe ask the question in a different way, or I jabber on about something to give them that time. I generally don't interrupt. I'll wait for natural pauses, or maybe I'll signal that I want to say something, because usually I video, or as I said, I'm sitting with the person, give them a little sharp intake of breath, a little gesture. But I occasionally will interrupt. If I think that something they've said is unclear and important, I think it's wrong, or if the answer has become too unfocused or it's going on too long. But also, I'll try not to interrupt if instead a follow-up question will do instead. I've come across a thing more recently, a strangely polite way to interrupt is not saying the thing you want to say, but instead saying, I'm going to interrupt you, or may I stop you? And usually the person will give way and everyone's a little happier rather than talking over the person. Over the last 5 years, I've made 113 podcasts. I've learned more than I could have imagined about a very wide range of topics. And on a personal note, on a personal note, the podcast on repetitive strain injury, career advancement, and an interview with Dylan Reisenberger, the guy behind Poly, have led to direct and long-lasting impacts for me. And obviously, podcasting and interviewing has landed me in front of you talking about that topic. In summary, this is what I do. I prepare well, I know enough to ask good questions, I have an agenda, I make sure everyone's relaxed, I get a story, learn a lot, and make a friend. And here is the final word. Thank you.